/x/ I have a recent skinwalker encounter that I'd like to get off my chest. Now, I'm not the best writer and have spent some time pre-writing this to ensure the details are all included as well as relevant pictures. I'm going to forewarn you, it's not really that exciting. No one died and for that I'm fortunate. Be me, 24 years old. Biologist currently finishing a PhD at a top Baptist university in Central Texas. I've been in state for a few years now, however originally came from up north. I've made it more than halfway through the program and are finishing up my research projects in preparation to graduate with my PhD. My research focuses on mosquito-borne illnesses and I intend to utilize my PhD and my research interests as a ticket to direct commission as a medical entomologist for the Army. A lot of my research consists of field work. This includes mosquito larvae collections. As I conduct a lot of field work, I often find myself in remote places, including state and national parks. Over the last few years I've been collaborating with a former military medical entomologist. The reason I had this encounter was fueled by the collaboration I have with this entomologist. During our collaborative work, I've traveled to mostly every state park in Central Texas. This including Fort Parker, which is handily located west of the Piney Woods region of Texas. The reason I mention this is that I've heard of other cryptid stories, including skinwalkers in East Texas, and Fort Parker was a few hours from Piney Woods, where another /x/ poster encountered one. I never saw anything weird up to this point, but believe what I saw was a skinwalker due to the sheer proximity to the Piney Woods and the short time it would take to get there. Now this day, I wasn't in the Piney Woods or Fort Parker, however I had traveled to Meridian State Park. Meridian is in central/eastern Texas, south of Dallas and considered the heart of Bosque County. It was around 3 hours from Fort Parker and 4 or 5 from the Piney Woods region. I was tasked with doing some mosquito larvae surveys to see what species were present, and this had become a routine activity, so I thought nothing of it. The park was eerily deserted for a Sunday morning with a few campsites set up, and a few park rangers working. I quickly signed in at the ranger station, showed my collection credentials and was given a parking sticker/receipt for my car windshield. The weather was quite good, with the temperature around 74, and partially cloudy skies. I parked my car at one of the parking lots next to the lake, specifically next to Lakeside Campground Premium Shelter 4. I had counted no more than 5 cars, and from memory remember seeing a bunch of Taiwanese tourists. I applied bug spray. As a biologist I've learned a lot about mosquito-borne illness, tick-borne illness, and I wouldn't be a happy camper to be on the receiving end of any pathogen. I grabbed my rucksack out of my trunk, as well as my collection gear, larval dipper, strainer, Eppendorf tubes, 50 milliliters conical tubes. Now I'm usually legally carrying when I go into state parks, this due to being from the north originally and having to deal with predators. Now I'm no /K/O Mondo and don't have a Chinese girlfriend SKS, but I do have a rusty 9mm, S&W, M&PM 2.0. However on this day, I chose not to bring it because of the humidity being pretty bad. My original plan was to hike the Bosque Trail and cross over onto the Shinnery Ridge Trail, sampling any streams I passed. I started out on the Civilian Conservation Corps Bridge 6, and made my way north on the Bosque Trail. It was pretty amazing at first. The forest was alive with insect activity, bird calls and a slight breeze which rustled the trees. The Bosque Trail at this point crosses over into the smaller Little Forest Junior Trail, which is about 0.8 miles long. I stopped at Wildflower Field as it was the first time I visited the park and I wanted to see some of the sights. The field was mostly dead, the wildflowers trampled, withered and covered in weeds. I reluctantly continued along the trail and saw maybe one other person a quarter mile I was on the Junior Trail. He asked what I was doing and I briefly explained why I was carrying all the gear. We parted ways and I eventually made it back on the Bosque Trail. After a while I stopped at B Ledge, which is a rock formation overlooking Lake Meridian. It was an amazing spot, so I decided to take a picture there which I could use for Facebook or whatever. Now as I left the ledge the weird things started to happen and they continued to intensify as I went down the trail. This is the typical setup and an okay pic of the rock. A quarter mile from the B Ledge I started to encounter large objects blocking the trail path. Several logs seems to have been dragged onto the trail. Additionally, fallen trees were spread out along the next quarter-mile stretch. Crossing over them was quite difficult and there was quite a lot of them. This continued for several hundred feet until the trail steeply went up the side of the mountain. It seems that at some point the rangers had carved out stone stairs into the rock face, however they were deteriorated and at this point hard to traverse. The trail had a long railing made from what looked to be an outdoor power cord, however due to COVID I didn't use it. The disrepair continued to intensify as I made my way deeper onto the trail. At the start the trail markers were shiny metallic rectangles with a blue indicator nailed to trees. However they soon transitioned into just blue spray paint on the bark. I constantly kept getting lost on the trail. Now I'm not a person who gets lost easily. I've had a lot of hiking experience and consistently went on collections in various state parks. Upon reaching the first stream I crouched to unpack my ruck and started to collect larvae using the dipper. The water wasn't that deep, it wasn't flowing and had become stagnant with a deep brownish color. Using my larval dipper I collected water and strained it for mosquito larvae. I made several collections and ultimately found several species including Culex pipiens quinquefasciatus, a very common southern species. Pick of rock stairs parts. After taking my samples I carefully packed my rucksack to ensure the samples wouldn't be disturbed during transit. From experience, if it's too shaky, they won't be able to float at the water's surface and breath and ultimately die. It is much easier to identify an adult mosquito versus a larvae, and I don't want to have to identify 100 dead larvae. As I continued to venture forth, the trail started to get worse and worse. It reached a point where I became pissed off and thought to myself, why the heck does it look this way, etc., what are the rangers doing, etc. I started to take GPS tagged pictures, which I could pass off to the rangers for trail repair operations. At this point, I doubted that any common person, let alone a weekend hiker, would be able to successfully navigate this trail, and thought it posed a significant safety risk. Continuing onward down the trail I reached a dense area of woods. It seems that out of nowhere, the trail enters a thick brush and stays in it for quite a while. The thick brush had minimal undergrowth, but darkened the trail due to the thick canopy created by the overlapping trees. Now I am a religious person. Thinking back, I should have realized that darkness ultimately relates to evil and should have been forewarned of continuing. Entering the dense wood seems to have transformed everything around me, not physically but in a sense where it felt different. The bird calls disappeared, the insects were silent and the trees were not rustling anymore. Slightly alarmed I continued onward, as I was approximately an eighth of the way through the S.T.A.L.K.E.R trail and had several more streams needed to be collected, at which could take several hours. It was 1 p.m. at this point. After a while I felt like I was being watched, and I started to get very anxious. Now I'm not a perfect person, but I had a really strong feeling I was being watched. I usually don't get feelings like this, so when I experience them it's usually wise to trust them. I scanned the area and didn't see anything, so I continued onward. There was still no noise, so I increased my pace so that I could get out of this creepy area quickly. I soon reached a second stream and decided to sample it. Like the first, the water was dark and stagnant. I unpacked my gear and quickly worked to collect samples. I found a few varied insect larvae, including several mosquito larvae and several dragonfly larvae. I removed the dragonfly larvae as they kill mosquito larvae, and if I had left them all the mosquitoes would have been dead before I returned to campus. As I was packing up, I started to smell a stagnant copper smell. Now it is hard to explain, but the best explanation is a mixture of blood, roadkill and death. I'm having a difficult time writing this next statement, but I'll give it my best go. As a man of science, I've learned a lot about the biology of living creatures. I've been able to extract mosquito blood meals and determine the blood meal host species using mitochondrial DNA. I've gene edited and made transgenic mosquitoes, with edited receptors. I believe in a rational explanation for everything, as I've experienced a structured order to nature. At first I freaked out a little bit internally, but had a strong belief that some armadillo decided to die near the trail and his decomposing corpse was responsible for the smell. Now the trail was still in a thick part of brush, so not seeing a corpse wasn't too alarming. I continued down the trail heading toward the northern bend in the S.T.A.L.K.E.R trail, which can be seen on the trail map. Upon reach the northern bend I stopped for a few seconds. I still felt like I was being followed, but couldn't smell the stagnant copper anymore, so I partially relaxed, looked at the map, then continued onward, southwestern down the trail. After a short while the smell returned. I was far enough from the stream that it would be very unlikely that it wafted this far. This startled and concerned me, as it isn't normal for so many corpses to be near trails, and I've never experienced something like this before. I reached a small bridge and the thick forest started to clear out into where I could see for a short distance between the trees. I stopped for a minute to look at the map and my phone, as the trail had sort of dissipated. The bridge had a small stream running underneath it, but I reluctantly still felt awkward, so I didn't sample it. While looking for where the trail continued toward, I found a large black object standing in my peripheral vision, more or so 300 feet or 100 meters away. My eyes adjusted to it and the image focused into what looked like a person standing, 6 feet tall. However, the face was wrong and it was covered in fur, not clothing. I looked away for a second and looked back and the object disappeared. I started to internally freak out, but soon found where the trail started back up and the object was standing in the opposite direction when I saw it. I noped.jpg down the trail, and ensured I kept my eyes scanning near where I saw the object. My biggest concern at this point was something was following me, possibly a large animal, and I'd rather not make the 6 o'clock news. While continuing down the trail, the smell still lingered, and I saw it again, this time around 300 feet or 100 meters away again. This time I noticed that it was some sort of animal. I assumed a deer standing on its back feet. I stopped to observe it and noticed it was walking on 2 feet, very awkwardly, and the fur seemed to have large missing spots. I knew it wasn't human, as humans don't walk that way, nor if injured walk that way. It had a very primal animalistic walk. I had blinked and at some point it disappeared. I got really spooked and almost started sprinting down the trail. I covered a mile of harsh terrain in about 5 minutes. I made it to a clearing where I could see across the lake and toward where I had parked. At this point I could hear something from the direction I came in. It seemed to be slowly getting louder. "Bill, where'd go? Bill, go you?" My mind pieced together that it was saying, "Bill, where'd you go?" I have no clue who Bill is, and the voice didn't sound human. It's as if an animal's voice box was being forced to pronounce human words. It sounded raspy and primal. This absolutely scared the ever-living shit out of me. I kept a steady pace down the trail. I kept scanning my surroundings and cursing at myself for not bringing my pistol. The smell intensified, and I'm pretty sure it was following me closely. I made due diligence to ensure I wasn't being outmaneuvered or flanked. Whatever it was hunting me, and I had around 70 pounds of gear on me and was ultimately a slow-moving target. I eventually made it to the eastern campsites marked with a picnic bench on the map and felt a sigh of relief. I'm not sure if these things hunt in open terrain, but I would have a good view of it if it left the tree line. To my surprise, there was an older middle-aged lady camped out there. She had a dog with her, and the dog was going absolutely nuts, barking. At first I thought I spooked the dog, but after looking at it for a while, it was barking at something in the tree line, not me. After a while it whimpered and ran away from the tree line and toward the lady's tent, and she called his name. Let's say Fido because I can't remember it. I socially distanced a hello wave, and continued to awkwardly run down the trail carrying my gear. It was quite peaceful and quiet for a short distance down the trail, and eventually I reached a road. I felt guilty about how that lady was probably going to get murdered by whatever that was, and felt fortunate I escaped. About 30 minutes later I stumbled out on a Forest Service road. The trail seemed to wind onto the road and just abruptly end. Now from my recollection, this is the road on the southwestern corner of the map, which parallels the trail. The smell started to come back and I started to panic again. I heard weird Fido, which really freaked me out because whatever was saying that was mirroring the lady. Now the trail didn't have a good indicator of where it started back up. I was freaking out as the noise was increasing. I started to head, I presume, north on the road, and eventually figured out it was the wrong way as it didn't follow the contour of the road on the map. I double-time it back and see a park ranger truck driving down the road toward me. I flagged him down and asked him where the Bosque trail started back up. To my surprise, the trail actually backs onto the road, where you have to walk down the road following spray-painted dots, and eventually it goes back into the woods. I'm sure the ranger knew it was up because he was very brief and told me to stay on the trails. I asked him about if there were any predators in the woods which I should worry about. His eyes got real big and he told me to stay on the trails, not to deviate, and to probably call it a day. He took off speeding down the road and I awkwardly sprinted south down the road, and eventually found the trail again. The whole time, in the distance I heard where trail back start. The fucker was mocking me and was stalking me while I talked to the ranger. I hauled my ass down the trail and eventually reached a clearing. This clearing being the southern bend of the trail where it curves off east into a straight line. This area was quite open, almost reminded me of a rice field as there was swamps on either sides of the trail, and it was elevated on a grass mound 8 feet up and 10 feet wide. I continued in a sprint across the mound and reached the end of the trail where it loops to my car. When I reached the bend which led toward where I parked, I stopped and looked back. It was standing on the mound near the forest opening, about 200 feet, just staring at me. It wasn't on the 2 legs anymore, however on all 4s. The face looked honestly like the descriptions I've seen on here. It was sunken in, red dots and black eyes etc. It also seemed to be smirking. I booked it to my car, threw my ruck in the trunk and literally did not stop till I reached campus. Now, I'm not sure if it's real. I had packed a good meal, lots of water and wasn't dehydrated. I'm in good mental health, or as best I can be in a PhD program. It wasn't a deer, a bear or anything that I've seen before. Since then I've not wanted to go in a woods, or collecting rightfully so without another person. I'm sorry that this was uneventful, but I really wanted to get it off my chest. This is a picture of where on the map the trail ends and where I saw it.